We're going to be talking about alcohol, how it works in the brain, and what it is we can do about it if we have a problem with it, and where Jesus comes in on this, and some very specific scriptural teachings that give us a really straight line angle with how to handle it, and why it is that we have such a problem, not just with alcohol, but all forms of addiction and mental health issues, and using some brain science. Now I want to point out before we get started, I'm a former sports writer who became a therapist, who then started to work with addiction. I didn't study neuroscience other than in the front lines, working with people. My own interest and my own curiosity. And I learned enough about it to be able to talk about it. But plenty of people could criticize what I'm going to be talking about because it's not specific enough. And I'm like, listen, I do not have to understand every little detail of my automobile to know how to drive it, okay? I don't have to understand the carburetor and the alternator and those things. I just know that it's there, and that if I do the right things, you know, like the accelerator and the brake and like keeping miles on the road, I'll be able to drive the car pretty well, all right? That's the level in which we'll be talking about with how the brain works with alcohol, and why it is that we're capable of healing, but we're often looking at the wrong thing, and why it's important to use other areas of our brain to learn how to heal. But I'm going to do it as a sports writer, okay? I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm going to do it as a former sports writer, now a therapist who works in the front lines with people. And to see it in a way that is defined from a medical director I talked to years ago when I did this exact same sort of demonstration talking about heroin. And I said, am I getting the science exactly right? And he says, medical imagery is more important than getting the science right. And I'm like, oh, I love that, medical imagery. If you can inspire people to know that they can heal themselves, then you've done a good job. Who cares if you reference the amygdala correctly? It's just not that important. The parts that matter are the way the brain works, the functions of the brain, and the fact that there's a healing aspect there, okay? So as we dive into it, we're going to start with this. You don't have to understand this at all. In Scripture, this is in Philippians 4:7, it's a peace of God which surpasses all understanding. Understanding is something that happens here. Like, oh, I get how it works. Well, the peace of God is something we feel here. It's really the void that we're looking for, especially with drugs and alcohol, or all forms of mental health. There's something that we haven't fully established yet, and it's a deep peace. Why do people like to use substances? Because they want to shift the way they're feeling. And it's a deep peace, ultimately, that you might not understand. All I know is it works, though. You're like, okay, that feels right. I'm going to keep doing that. So we'll be talking about that. But at the same time, you don't have to, it's not going to give you all a test. You don't have to understand all of it. But it's helpful if you do, which is the second line by Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was a physicist. He happens to be a major part of the team of people who figured out how the Challenger blew up back in 1986, okay? He studied what happened, and he figured out that the O-rings were the problem. And that's one reason you might have ever heard of this guy. Another reason is he's the guy that did that in my book, the New Eyes book, chapter 4. He talks about the magic of the number 137. He said that the number 137 to physicists is so important, it's as if God himself wrote that number. What does that number represent? Metaphysically, it's the threshold between the physical world and the spiritual world. I could do a whole hour on that. We're not going to. But the guy, Richard Feynman, said that 137 is a magical number, or a number that God had to have written himself. Because it's a space, if you will, a place. It's sort of like 32 degrees. What's that? Where water starts to freeze. Well, 137 represents where spirit becomes physical, which is super interesting. Also not the point of our discussion. But that's what Richard Feynman talked about. Not the metaphysics. He talked about the physics, okay? But so Feynman's a really smart guy. And Feynman says that it does not do harm to a mystery to know a little about it. Guess what? We're all in a mystery. This journey called life is a mystery. There's an unfolding that's happening. There's a story that we're all experiencing. To learn a little bit about it does not do harm to the mystery. And yet at the same time, you don't have to know anything about it. You don't have to understand what we're going to describe. But if you'd like to understand the mystery a little bit better, and why Jesus said stuff like heal thyself, and why traditional treatments often don't work, especially a lot of the medicinal ones, you know, they work okay, but not great. It's because we all have the capability of healing ourselves using the brain. Do you have to understand this? No, but if you do understand it a little bit, it can be useful, okay? So that's up to you. So I'm just going to go through how stress and alcohol work from a sports writer therapist perspective, okay? And so here we have These two big circles are called neurons, and you've got 100 billion of them in your head. And they're little pharmacies. And pharmacies are where we find drugs and medicines. And if you use them correctly, they can help you, okay? But all of them only work because you have chemicals in your head up there to work with. They're Trojan horses in many ways. They're imitating something that's already in your head, okay? They're mimics. And so we have hundreds of neurotransmitters in our heads, but a couple of them, just a few basic ones that are involved with alcohol, are epinephrine and GABA. And epinephrine is the stress chemical that neurons produce. Okay, actually other parts of the brain produce it, but for our purposes, it's quite useful just to think, all right, so I got this pharmacy up there and it's kicking out this chemical called epinephrine. When does epinephrine get produced? When you're stressed about anything. It's quite literally the fight or flight chemical. You know, if you have to fight something or run from it, like a saber-toothed tiger, that was useful thousands of years ago or millions of years ago when man encountered a saber-toothed tiger. What if it says, come here, little kitty? The man says, come up here, I'm going to give you a snack. And then he becomes the snack. That person's genes didn't go to the next gene pool, okay? But those who had epinephrine, like, threat, walk away from big kitty, okay? Don't go pat it on the head. That person survived and passed the genetic code to slowly walk away from big cat, okay? And now future generations found epinephrine to be adaptive. The fight or flight that's going on inside ourselves is very useful, okay? But cavemen didn't worry about the stuff like we worry about now. Like me, like my biggest stressor is my fantasy football draft. You know, who am I going to pick number one, okay? Or the stock market, or my neighbors, or things like, did I pay enough in my taxes? And by the way, we didn't. I got a bill the other day. We had to pay $72 more. Go figure, okay? So that's the type of stress that we worry about now. Cavemen didn't have to. Well, we get addicted to stress in many different ways. And we get so addicted to it, we start to produce it so easily in our brain just by worrying about stuff, right? Worry equals producing an epinephrine. And this is what it looks like. The brain, this little red square, squirts it out through the axon, it hits the receptor in the adjacent neuron, and once it plugs in, now you feel stress. Because you have a chemical in your head that's responsible for feeling stress. And as soon as that docks into that receptor, I now feel stress. And it doesn't matter what you're worried about. If you say, I'm worried, stress. You could be completely wrong about the thing, worrying about something that didn't happen, and you're still going to feel stress. So once that hits that receptor, you feel stress. You also have another chemical. I'm drawing it different because your brain has all these locks and keys in it. And it has to be the right shape. The square has to fit the square-shaped receptor. Well, this little triangle here fits a triangle receptor in the brain. And this one we're going to call GABA. Well, that's what it is. Gamma-aminobutyric acid. And it's the relaxing chemical in your head. You have the stress chemical in your head, epinephrine, and you have a relaxing chemical in your head, GABA. And GABA works in a really interesting way because GABA offsets the epinephrine. If I'm producing a lot of epinephrine, I'm filling these receptors, and now I'm going to feel stress. But GABA has its own receptor. In effect, it's like the brakes on a car. So I got these little triangle receptors right next to the GABA, or the epinephrine receptor. And if I hit the brakes on my car, what happens? Car slows down. If I produce GABA, GABA fits that receptor closes off for the stress. Now I can't feel stress. Or I won't feel stress because these receptor areas are actually they're chilling. They're slowed down. Just like if you're speeding down the highway and then you hit the brakes. If you're speeding through anxiety in your head and you hit the brakes by producing GABA, now you're a little more relaxed. And this is how the brain naturally works. If you do too much epinephrine, you're going to feel something called anxiety. If you worry too much, you're going to start to experience anxiety. If you don't produce enough GABA, you're definitely going to experience anxiety. Well, it turns out that alcohol, in effect, has the same shape as GABA. Alcohol and other sedatives like benzodiazepines. This is Valium and Klonopin and Xanax, and more. They have the same shape as GABA, in effect. And that means I can take something that's external to the body, also shaped like a triangle. It hits that receptor, and that chills the brain out. And so I can be producing a whole lot of stress, but not really feel it, because if I plug up the brain with all this, if I hit the brakes all over the place, now all of a sudden I'm like, man, I don't really feel anything. And you don't for a little while. And while this is happening, while you're taking alcohol to imitate GABA, two things happen inside the brain. One is this stress doesn't go away. If you keep hitting the accelerator while you're hitting the brake, what's going to happen? Your car is going to rev, it's going to have some energy resistance. Well, when you take alcohol or drink alcohol or a benzodiazepine, what happens over time is this stress, the epinephrine, in effect, builds up inside your synapses, the area between these neurons. I'm not feeling it because I'm on a medicine that's checking my brain by hitting the brakes. But it starts to back up. It's like a dam on a river. If I dam up a river, the water backs up. Downstream, your body, I'm relaxed. But upstream, it's now being dammed up. When I come off of the medicine or I stop drinking, what happens? Flood. Because this epinephrine doesn't go away. Its source is your worrying, okay? Whatever it is that you're worried about, saber-toothed tiger, fantasy football draft, money, whatever, the system starts to like a river, flow epinephrine river into your head. And if all you do is dam it up, then we're gonna have problems. Plus, when you drink alcohol or take a sedative and you over-rely on it, the GABA hibernates, the GABA goes away. Now your own natural sedative has disappeared. And if I'm not producing that anymore, and have all this excess stress backed up inside of my head, and then I remove the benzo, I remove the alcohol, and this little floodgate gets open, so to speak, what happens? I have this flood, all of the epinephrine now pounds those receptors. This is one reason why we have hangovers. The next day, the stress that we just avoided by drinking or using benzos or whatever hits us the next day. We're like, oh, I don't feel so good, right? But what if you do this chronically over time? And now it hits you really hard, which is why you could have a seizure or a heart attack or a stroke by coming off a benzo or even alcohol. And it's why people get the shakes, things like that. It's their own natural epinephrine saying there's saber-toothed tigers all over the place, right? And you feel that intensity. And it's as if it's happening, because to the body, it doesn't care what you're worried about. Whatever released epinephrine in the first place, it's like, well, here you go. It's not judging you. But if you just keep saying I should worry, then it's just going to keep producing the epinephrine. And if we compensate by using alcohol or benzodiazepine and we plug those receptors up and the GABA goes away, the brain knows what it's doing. It's trying to encourage you to do something, okay? And it's evolutionary that way. Just like the people who responded to saber-toothed tigers, well, the people that learn about what's happening inside their head, they have a chance to develop, evolutionary speaking, in your own personal life, but also for future generations. Because what's the deal? I'm not going to make stress go away by plugging up all my GABA receptors with alcohol or benzos. I'm actually not really going to make stress go away by producing the GABA, my natural benzo and alcohol, myself, okay? Because who really wants to spend so much time working on that when all you have to really do is learn how not to worry so much? If we practice like a skill, not worrying so much, I will now produce less stress into the system, and if I have less stress in the system, I have less need for the GABA, right? Now, there's nothing that man has ever invented or snorted or smoked to make the stress go away. It's only an effect. It feels like it's going away. But you could be worrying off of alcohol, you could be worrying on alcohol. You could be stressed off of Xanax, you could be stressed on Xanax. You just don't feel it if you're taking the medicine. Now, what we need is a nice balance, which means if I've become a sedative, I've become dependent on sedatives, then and my GABA has gone away, I'm going to have to learn how to produce that again, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But here's where we bring Jesus into the fold, okay? And the idea of, all right, why is it do we have this great teacher, this wonderful teacher, who turned water into wine, right? What's that about? Why was Jesus not walking around turning wine into water if alcohol is the problem? And you'll see in a minute, he gave some very specific teachings on how to change this and how to reverse the dynamic of any addiction. And again, this goes into all other forms of addiction, but also mental health. So before we get to Jesus' teachings, I'm going to show you again why this is so challenging, because words mean different things depending on where you're at in your journey. And what works for one person might not work for another. And I'll show you that through very specific teachings. Here we have in Proverbs 31, 6 and 7. This is the NIV version. Let beer be for those who are perishing, and wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty and remember their misery no more. Doesn't that sound like the Bible encouraging people to drink? And you take it out of context, that's exactly what it sounds like, okay? Give beer to those who are perishing and wine for those who are in anguish. At the end of this, we're going to talk about what that really means. But it certainly seems like advice to go to when people are suffering. Yeah, drink, you'll feel better, right? Well, it's not that. We'll get deeper into it. And keep in mind, there's hundreds of contradictions in the Bible, hundreds. My favorite, Isaiah 9:6 calls Jesus the Prince of Peace. You might have heard that before. He's the Prince of Peace. Well, the Prince of Peace in Matthew 10:34 says, I didn't come to bring peace on earth. I came to separate you from your family and your friends and your own life. So don't call me the Prince of Peace. He didn't say that. That's what the verse says. I didn't come to bring peace on earth, said the Prince of Peace. Isn't that funny? And then he says, I came to bring a sword. I came to bring a sword, not peace. Well, that's the same guy that later on says, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So which is it, Jesus? You bringing a sword, or you're telling people not to use a sword? Well, it depends. Hint, the sword is your mind. But we'll get to that later. Words mean different things depending on where you're at. So there's lots of contradictions, and that includes what wine and beer and alcohol and drinking really mean, okay? Depending on where you're at. And it matters greatly for how the way the brain's going to function and how the way you see this stuff. The reason why it's difficult is because we're in a world of duality. And if all we're doing is seeing the physical, and we're looking for solutions in the physical, like, man, I won't stress if I have enough money, or I won't worry if my health stays good, or there's no reason to be anxious as long as the right guy's president, those types of things. Jesus doesn't address that stuff directly. Not the actual physical aspect. You know what he says? He just says, stop worrying. He says 5 times in the Sermon on the Mount to not worry. The only time he mentions alcohol, if he says it at all, is to not worry about what you drink. This is his exact quote. Do not be anxious about your life, what you eat or what you drink, nor about your body, nor your clothes. Okay? He's telling us to not be anxious. Does he say, do not drink and make sure alcohol and make sure you eat your veggies, and the only types of clothes you should wear are what they wear in school, especially Catholic schools, where you wear this, a uniform or whatever. Does he say anything like that? Did he ever tell people what to wear? No. He says, don't worry about it. But also don't worry about what you drink. Interesting. He also says, which of you, by being anxious, can add 1 hour to their lives? Does being anxious help? Never helps anything. I just showed you how it actually creates the drinking need in the first place. The more anxiety, the more mental health issues, the more challenges, the more addictions, because that's the source. That's the problem. He's going straight to the source. It's not the alcohol. This is a man who turned water into wine. And he wasn't saying, people, you know what the problem is? It's all the substances out there, okay? And it's all the cheeseburgers, and in the future there's going to be like a Taco Bell, and you're going to have direct access to really fatty foods, and you're going to be able to drink pop. Don't eat it when it comes around. Did he say that? He said, don't worry about what you eat. Don't worry about what you drink. Why? Because it's the not worrying part that matters, okay? And it has to come first. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. Well, that's interesting. Remember, this is a spiritual teacher who's telling us something very important. You're going to have to trust, okay? Because all of us are down in the physical world trying to fix the physical world, and we're trying to do it, especially with an addiction, by just saying no to drugs and alcohol. It's just a very poor strategy. It doesn't really help. Just say no. It's involved, but it's just not a very good strategy. A good strategy is say yes. Say yes to the Holy Spirit, and say yes to these very specific teachings that Jesus is talking about. When asked, or when he's talking to some of his colleagues of the day, which commandment is the most important? Does he say to not kill? Does he say to not steal? The 10 commandments? Does he say to not drink? No, he says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. Right? Passionately. Love all the way. Okay? Then he says to love another as oneself. Interesting. Teammates. Because I'm supposed to love all the way and love you at the same time. And then he teaches later to love your enemies. Well, there's no better source of stress than hating our enemies, right? And hating our life circumstances. Not loving creates the stress. Loving your adversities, loving your challenges. And how many times we've talked about this over the years? Loving your recovery, okay? The healthiest people I know got messed up, mixed up in drugs and alcohol, right? And then they got into recovery, and now they're the healthiest people I know. There's a lot of unhealthy people out there that never got mixed up in all this stuff, and they judge the people that do. But people who get deep into recovery, they learn a lot about themselves, for sure. And so, like, blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are the weak. These are his teachings. And so you've got to love your adversities. Paul, who was decapitated for teaching Jesus and was in prison for decades, said you should rejoice in your sufferings. James, Jesus' brother, said, consider it a joy when you face adversities of all kinds. So whether it's a saber-toothed tiger or your fantasy football draft or financial stressors or relationship issues or whatever, rejoice in it. Now what happens? Less stress. Then less need for alcohol and sedatives later, okay? Now, he beautifully mixes these two things together in Luke 21:34. Luke 21:34, he says, be careful or your hearts will be weighed down with drunkenness and the anxieties of your life. And on that day, the day will close on you suddenly like a trap. Doesn't that sound like the addiction right there? It'll collapse upon you, because if you're both drinking and stressed, now you got a problem, okay? Now we've got dependency. And we don't know how to get out of it because the body sets this up, this system. It's such a wonderful system that teaches us eventually how to do it. But when we don't know what to do, we're now like a trap or caught up in our drunkenness and our anxieties. To be clear, in case I forget to mention it, the drunkenness is ultimately talking about to the ego. He's not referring to the alcohol anyways. We are drunk with ego, right? The idea of our self, the fact that I need things to go the way I want them to go. And it's more important than the way you want things to go. That's ego, the personal self. And we have to be careful to be not drunk on that. But it works for alcohol too. So we have to be careful not to be weighed down by those things. He tells us in Matthew 8:26, why are ye fearful? Why are you fearful, O ye of little faith? Ye of little faith. He was saying this to his disciples, right? They were afraid. This is when he was going to walk on water, and he went and encouraged them to come out onto the water. Why were they afraid? They thought they were going to drown, right? And he says to his own disciples, ye of little faith. Well, nothing makes stress go away better than faith, right? And he's challenging the very people that knew him the most. Trust your life experiences. Never does he say like them. He does say love your enemy, love your adversities, trust them. Don't have to like them, though. He didn't like getting crucified. You have to like your mental health issue. No, you don't have to like your mental health issues and your addictions, but you do have to love them. Because that's what works. Now you're trusting on the highest of levels. And that changes the dynamic inside the brain. So, to produce more GABA and decrease the anxiety that triggers the desire to drink or to use sedatives in the first place, there's a lot of virtuous ways to do it. There's also physiological ways to do it, okay? To find the Christ within, which is operating like Jesus and actually being able to do these virtues like he says, meditation is amazingly helpful. Learning how to focus and practicing things like yoga, which is like body's meditation. They say 1 hour a day, 1 hour of working on these things elevates your GABA inside your brain by 27%. No idea how they get that specific, but I'm going to trust them. Okay? And it makes total sense. Doing the practices that actually relax us can elevate your own natural GABA by 27%. So if I'm dealing with someone who has a sedative addiction, am I talking, well, you know what you need to do, stop drinking and stop using Xannies or whatever? Well, that sort of goes without saying. We understand that. But it's so much easier to do when you actually practice meditation and yoga. And that's what boosts the GABA. And then Jesus, when he emphasizes stuff like loving your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who spite you. That's Matthew 5:44. Let me say it again. Love your enemies, bless those who curse you. Are we good at that in this country? Do good to those who hate you. I thought we're supposed to hate those who hate us. Pray for those who spite you. No. I think we should get really stressed about that. And try to correct them. That's what we should do, right? Well, that's how we're acting. But Jesus is going, no. This is how you should do it. Because guess what happens? When you do it that way, goodbye epinephrine. Now you're going to produce chemicals like serotonin and endorphins and maybe even DMT, a spiritual chemical, okay? Because you're radically doing something that the ego hates. You're producing chemistry on a really high level because you're actually following what this master says. Now, weave in those virtues. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? Forgive them. They know not what they do. All these teachings. Come to me and I will give you rest, he says. That's not Jesus himself. He died 2,000 years ago. He's never going to rub my back or hold an umbrella over my head on a sunny day, okay? He's referring to the Christ within. It will give you rest. Being the Christ inside yourself, like he said, know ye not ye are gods? And Paul says the mystery is Christ is in you. Come to the Christ in you, which I could draw here too, okay? The Christ in you will give you rest, because guess what happens? Your stress goes down, your epinephrine goes down, your GABA goes up, your serotonin goes up, all because you shifted your mind. Or keep practicing worrying about things. Your choice. He's not telling us what to do behaviorally. He's telling us how to be, right? In fact, he almost never gave physical advice, and yet a lot of religion and Christianity has become about that. The commandments weren't about physical commandments. He just said, love God entirely. Right? Guess what happens after that? From there, the brain changes. The anxiety goes down. The epinephrine lowers. The GABA goes up. And then all of a sudden, you're like, all of a sudden, I don't feel like drinking that much. All of a sudden, I found more value in my own inner chemistry than I do getting something off the street. So come to Christ. That's your mind and your heart. And the peace is when, the rest is when you find the peace inside yourself. The autonomic nervous system gets in balance. And now you only worry when there's a saber-toothed tiger or if there's a fire in your building, okay? There's times to worry. Just not about the fantasy football draft, okay? Deep breathing and compassion and all that kind of stuff. There's plenty of different ways to do it, but we have to know that what we're doing is elevating the GABA and making this epinephrine disappear. So what are these double meanings all about? And so like these references to Jesus taking water and turning it into wine, it's so easy to think of that as literal, and it works based upon what I just described here. He isn't making sure we get rid of all alcohol and get rid of all benzos and get rid of all drugs. No, that's not the point. The whole point is that stuff is here and it can be used correctly. Is there anything wrong with toasting someone at a wedding? No. Is there anything wrong with using an opioid after dental surgery? No. But is there something wrong, so to speak, or dysfunctional about drinking or using heroin to cover up your anxiety? Yes. And that's Jesus' whole point. It's not going to work. Eventually, it's going to be shown to you that that's not going to work. And eventually, the only thing that's going to work is when you get into the metaphysical understanding of things. Turning water into wine means taking your mind, your ego mind, and turning it into the spirit mind. He walked on water because the water is a reference metaphysically to the lower mind. And the Noah's flood and the ark and all that stuff is all about getting flooded with emotions, the types of emotions that we feel, like anxiety and stress and worry, whenever we were letting the ego minds take over. It doesn't work. You must become spiritual. And in becoming spiritual, what dies? So now we return to the beginning at the end here. In Proverbs, let beer be for those who are perishing and wine for those who are in anguish. Okay? It's in the Bible multiple times to eat, drink, and be merry. Is that telling us that we should go drink and go to Taco Bell a lot? Is that eat, drink, and be merry? Maybe it's metaphysical. Maybe the point of it is, eat, drink, and be merry for spirit, okay? The actual wine is the Christ inside of each of us. Now you can eat, drink, and be merry all you want as long as what you're doing is walking that walk. So why do we have give beer to those who are anxious and wine to those who are dying or whatever? Because it's referencing the ego, okay? And the beer and the wine is higher consciousness. The alcohol is literally spirit. We call alcohol spirits because of the way that it's made. The essence of it is brought out when they make alcohol. It's brought out. That's what we're experiencing. Your essence is brought out of you because of the experiences you're having. And if you do it the right way, you indeed will eat, drink, and be merry. And there's one verse, I think it's in Isaiah, we said, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die, right? And people go straight to, and this is done in like war situations, like, we're going to party the night before a war because tomorrow we might get killed, okay? Well, what if while you're eating and drinking and being merry on the Spirit, something does die the next day? What is the thing that dies? Of course, the ego. And that's because you submitted to the natural laws of things. The fact is the brain's got this. You've got it as long as you work with it. But if you keep seeking answers outside of yourself, you'll never find it. Seeking you'll find means finding the answers inside of yourself. That's where you find it. And this is why, physician, heal thyself.